Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for coming. Unfortunately, we have to turn off this background because if you're online, you wouldn't be able to see us because of some lighting issues online. So we're going to lose that background, unfortunately. But thank you all very much for joining us in person and online. I'm Todd Preston, the Executive Director of the Modernizing Foreign Assistance Network, MFAN. We're a bipartisan coalition committed to strengthening the effectiveness and accountability, the return on investment of U.S. development and humanitarian assistance. In a time of deep division here in Washington, today is an all too rare and encouraging moment. A broad bipartisan group made up of leaders from both parties, former officials, top policy experts, and development practitioners have come together around a shared vision for the future of U.S. foreign assistance. The report we're releasing today, the consensus principles and recommendations for the future of U.S. international assistance, lays out that vision with concrete, actionable steps for policymakers here in Congress and in the administration and how to achieve that vision. I want to reiterate that these recommendations are the product of perspectives from across the political spectrum, appointees in Republican and Democratic administrations, partners at institutions such as the Atlantic Council, CSIS, Interaction, One, the Center for Global Development, among others. So why has this disparate group come together and forged a consensus? It's because they agree that done right, international assistance is a strategic imperative for the United States. It reflects the very best of who we are, a nation that leads not just with power, but with principle. So this is a bipartisan blueprint for what U.S. foreign assistance should look like in the months and the years ahead, preserving what works, strengthening what needs to be improved, and innovating where we must. It details what's needed to construct a high-performing foreign assistance system going forward at the State Department, the Millennium Challenge Corporation, the U.S. International Development Finance Corporation, and other agencies. A holistic system that advances U.S. economic, security, and humanitarian interests. These recommendations build directly on MFAN's March 25th recommendation, which you may have picked up a copy of, on the State Department USAID reorganization, which early on called for centralized leadership, accountability, and preservation of USAID's core capacities. This blueprint comes at a critical time. USAID has been shuttered. Thousands of programs have been ended. The reorganization of the State Department is moving forward. And right here in Congress this week, today, they are considering both FY25 rescissions and FY26 appropriations. That's why this set of recommendations is so timely and so important. It's a moment of both risk and opportunity, and the stakes for not getting this right, let's be clear, are very high. So that's why MFAN felt the urgency of bringing together this distinguished group and working to forge a consensus. So we're very fortunate to have a terrific panel to discuss all of this today. We've set aside plenty of time for questions because we want this to be a discussion. We had some members of Congress, both from the House and the Senate, that were planning to come by. Unfortunately, we've had some bad luck with National Defense Authorization markup in the House and some hearings in the Senate. So we regret that some members were not able to join us, but they do send their regards. Before I turn it over to Connor, who is going to walk us through the recommendations, I want to extend a deep appreciation to him for his leadership in shepherding these consultations and this work product. Connor has given very generously of his time and his talents. So thank you very much, Connor. I also want to thank my MFAN colleagues, Karen Swatson and Jenny Russell, for all the behind-scenes work that went into pulling this together. So let me introduce Connor very quickly. He is currently a non-resident fellow at the Center for Global Development. Most recently, he served as the team lead for foreign policy engagement at USAID, where he was responsible for supporting agency leadership on counter PRC activities and efforts. His full bio is in your printout, but prior to this role, he was a senior policy advisor in the Office of Development Cooperation at USAID. He also served at the Center for Strategic International Studies, and he was a previous executive director of the Modernizing Foreign Assistance Network. So, Connor, over to you, and thank you again.
Thanks so much, Todd, and thanks to MFAN for pulling this together, and a special thanks to all of the members of the consensus group. I think these are never easy tasks. I thought of myself as more of a champion cat herder in some ways, but it was a great group, and they actually made it quite easy. So before we get to the panel and a discussion of what to dig in a little bit about what these principles mean, I did want to provide a brief overview of the principles themselves and the recommendations. As Todd laid out, this is really a critical time for the future of U.S. international assistance and indeed U.S. international engagement. These principles and recommendations are really an effort to provide constructive feedback to strengthen what the administration has proposed to do with the state reorganization and the merging of USAID's remaining functions into the department. Ultimately, the primary goal of this exercise was to really ensure that U.S. international assistance remains impactful, that it's accountable, and that it is aligned with American interests and values. During this effort, we identified 5 core principles to strengthen the proposed plan. I'm going to briefly summarize them for you and some of the underlying recommendations. So, first, we need to forge strategic frameworks that deliver mutual value between the United States and our partner countries. We need to build a new framework for international assistance that delivers on a dual mandate approach that prioritizes both good development principles, but also a clear return on investment for the United States. And in the effort, we are likely going to need to be more selective in the countries, in the regions, and in the sectors that we engage in. The second principle we came up with was we need to eliminate remaining bureaucratic silos through unified leadership. If you look at the proposed State Department reorganization plan, they need to empower this proposed undersecretary to really enable that person to manage and provide strong coordination through planning, budgeting, and allocation of international assistance resources within the department, and also to provide coordination within the interagency, including the U.S. Development Finance Corporation, Millennium Challenge Corporation, Trade and Development, Export Import, and other agencies engaged in this. If you can't reduce the remaining fragmentation, in particular within the State Department, then this exercise will not achieve one of the long-running goals that they're looking for with this. The third principle is we need to match our ambition with resources. The administration should increase its proposed fiscal year 2026 budget requests. Of course, they've made it, and we saw the House markup today, this week, which is significantly. It is a significant increase over what the administration requested. But if you're going to achieve your stated foreign policy goals of stronger, safer, and more prosperous, you need more money. You also need to ensure that the State Department has an appropriate number of personnel with the right skill sets to actually implement and obligate the funds. The proposed 738 staffers is simply not enough to do an effective job that provides transparency, accountability to Congress and to the American taxpayer. Our fourth principle is that we need to further align strategy, spending, and results. We argue that the State Department should lead an interagency process in coordination with the National Security Council and consultation with outside experts to develop an international assistance strategy that identifies how these programs advance American foreign policy, economic security, and humanitarian objectives. And then finally, our fifth principle is to modernize delivery mechanisms for maximum impact. And ultimately, the administration should really prioritize maintaining flexible USAID contract and grant mechanisms. They need to continue to focus on the good work around innovation and cost effectiveness that's been introduced over the past several years. And they should build and strengthen on private sector engagement, which has been a bright spot over the years for both USAID and other parts of the system. We're going to dig into these principles and recommendations more with the panel, but let me simply close by saying, as I said at the beginning, these are never easy exercises. But the individuals that came together, Republican, Democrats, the former career staff, senior career staff, they came together because they do believe that international assistance can and should continue to play an important part in how the US engages the world. Events, as I was talking with a close colleague recently, and they made the point to me, events in the world are unpredictable. And we need to have the right skills, the experience, and the resources available to respond. So with that, I will close and turn it back over to Todd.
Thanks very much, Connor. Before we turn to the panel discussion, I'm really delighted to welcome Jim Kunder, a member of MFAN, who has a very distinguished career in public service. From 2006 to 2009, he was the acting deputy administrator at the U.S. Agency for International Development. Previously, he served as administrator for Asia and the Near East director for relief and reconstruction in Afghanistan, deputy assistant administrator for external affairs, and director of the agency's Office of Foreign Disaster Assistance. He bridges kind of both the, for lack of a better word, soft power and hard power. From 1970 to 1973, he was on active military duty as an infantry platoon commander in the United States Marine Corps. So we're very, very delighted to have Jim here. And Jim, why don't you please come to the podium and make remarks?
Can I ask a real quick question? Would you mind raising your hand if you're a congressional staffer? Oh, okay, good. Congratulations and thank you to all of you. There's a reason I asked that question. This is the first time in my life I've been in the Congressional Visitor Center. And I, of course, as I was walking across the yard to get here, I remembered when I was a junior staffer a few years ago. And in those days, anybody could just walk into the Congress. There were no metal detectors. There were no badges required. There were no IDs. You just walked in the building. There was a policeman kind of standing there, but nobody paid much attention to him or her. But anyway, so times have changed, and that's sort of the theme of what we're talking about here today. And I suspect that the reason I've had the honor to just give you a couple minutes of my point of view is that I have had the opportunity to see the projection of American power abroad in a couple of different guises, both on the military side. I did work at the State Department, the diplomatic side, and then at USAID. Now, I'm not going to give you a trite, let's make lemonade out of lemons speech. I have to be honest with you, and I'm going to get this off the table real quickly. I'm still very angry at the way this process has taken place. It was thuggish. It was brutal. It was unnecessarily insulting. And to my USAID colleagues, I want to offer thanks for their devotion and dedication over the years. But we are where we are today. And we're at a very special time because for the first time since I was a lot younger, we have peer competitors in the world. It's a serious time for our country's national security and foreign policy. So I just have one ask before we get into the panel discussion, which I'm looking forward to as well. And that is to put aside the simplistic frameworks that are easily imprinted upon the foreign assistance debate. Put aside the simplistic frameworks that are easily imprinted on this debate. It's very easy to accuse the folks downtown of letting children starve in Africa. It's very easy to accuse my ex USAID colleagues of being left leaning, scatterbrained people throwing the taxpayers' money around the world. The times are more serious than that. We do have peer competitors, lives are at stake around the world. So, my ask of all of you is to jettison all of that, take a look at where we are today, and try to make a deep dive on what it is exactly our nation requires of its foreign assistance program. What do we need to do in our times in order to make our program effective and really have an impact in the world? And that's what we're here to talk about today. And I personally want to thank my MFAN colleagues for coming up with this approach, because this is exactly what we need. The timing, as Todd said, is exactly right. So thank you for being here. I thank you for taking a close look at and then listen to what we're going to be talking about today. And please do me the favor of trying to take a close look at this from a new perspective and see what our nation needs to do so we have the foreign assistance program of the 21st century. Thank you.
Thanks, Jim. I think you really did a great job of framing that. I think you're absolutely right. I think the perspective we need to bring to this is, what do we want from this? And in a world where, you're correct, we have a lot of peer competitors for the first time in a generation. We do really need to think long and hard about that. And I think you're absolutely right. And I think that is exactly where we try to come from with these principles is, if we want this to be a strong part of how we engage with the world, then what does this need to look like? But I don't want to talk too much, because really you're here to hear from our good group here. And to unpack this, I'm joined by a terrific panel. I'm going to briefly introduce everyone, and then I really just want to jump right into questions for them and to leave enough time for questions from this great audience as well. So first, Jim Richardson. He's the former director of the Office of Foreign Assistance at the State Department. He was also a head of PLR, both under the first Trump administration. He is also a longtime congressional staffer before that. Michelle Similis, who was chief of staff to Administrator Gail Smith at USAID, head of PLR, former deputy administrator for management and resources at USAID, a longtime.
That filling the seats with contractors is enough. I think that we want U.S. government employees in those seats, because at the end of the day, what this administration talked a lot about, and we know happens in every program, is there is the need to do oversight of all of these programs. And you want U.S. government employees doing that oversight to make sure that we are accountable to the U.S. taxpayer who is counting on us to make sure that it all works. I am not, I know, having sat in the seat and looked at lots of different things, that the waste, fraud, and abuse that's been talked about is nowhere near what was happening at the agency. We had inspector generals, we had oversight, we had lots of processes in place to make sure that we were doing what we needed to be doing. But at the end of the day, you do want a U.S. government employee sitting in that seat feeling responsible, and not a contractor who's a third party looking at things. So the last thing I will say is to reflect what Jim was saying. I think you also need strong interagency collaboration. One of the things that I always talked about was that we were chasing after what DFC was doing, what MCC was doing. And I think you need to figure out what is the mechanism that makes sure that you're in a particular country. And I think the new model might be able to make this work better, but everybody is on the same page. Maybe we're all working from the same country roadmap, which was something that you all put into place, which we thought was a great model. But I think it's important to really have a structured way of working together that is not just the ad hoc NSC meeting that gets called together. So I'll stop there, but I just want to say thank you to MFAN for the hard work.
Thanks, Michelle. That was great. I do want to come back to you later on this question about Congress in particular, but first I do want to go to Dan. And so, Dan, you've been a long-time supporter of assistance. Like I said, you worked for Andrew Natsios during the Bush administration at USAID. You were at the IFC at one point as well. And you see assistance as an important tool. As a conservative, you see it as an important tool. I want you to make the case for how international assistance can make America stronger, safer, and more prosperous.
Okay, thanks. So thanks, Connor. Congratulations on this. I only said yes because Connor Savoy asked me to do this. Connor's emerged as an important leader in his own right. And so congratulations on this work, Connor. And make sure you tell Mrs.
I
I
will.
said that, please, but it's true. I lament very much the loss of AID. That everyone treated me really well at AID. I had a lot of friends there. I have a lot of friends there. I don't like the terrible disruption to people's lives. So I'm just going to leave it there, but I will say that I think there's with all of this disruption and loss, there's clearly a historic opportunity. And if you look at the 1961 Foreign Assistance Act, you had a Democratic controlled Senate, a democratically controlled House. The Senate was 65-35 Democratic. I think there was a 100-seat majority in the House. That's what ChatGPT told me. So, and we had a Democrat. Yeah, yeah. So it must be true. And then we had a Democratic president. We have a Republican House. We have a Republican Senate and a Republican president. So if there was an alignment on if we're actually going to see real change, it's probably going to happen with this political alignment. We can agree or disagree, but that's what I think. And I think my theory of change is just different than 8 years ago, where Connor and Errol and myself spent 14 weeks running a process between April 1 and the 14th of July, where we had 30 people and adjudicated 500 comments, which helped, I'm going to put it this way, delay the merger of aid into the State Department. A lot of reports don't. That did. I'm not gonna say it was like my top 5, but it was in my top 15 things that I was happy with in my time at AID. That really did matter. I think this time my theory of change is different. I think that, so if you're a Republican staffer here, I came here to meet you. So come say hello to me afterwards, because my theory of change is this. We're gonna need to have members of Congress who aren't looking to cross President Trump, but to agree with President Trump to make the country, using foreign assistance to make the country stronger, more secure, and more prosperous. We need to have ideas that emanate from the Republican Party on the Hill. We need Republican staffers and reformist Republican members to take this on. We then need to put together, kind of fill some meat on the bones on this. We then need to bring along the administration, and then we need to bring Democrats in Congress. That is how I think we actually need to approach this. 8 years ago, I did it differently. And most problem solving for this takes a different approach. Given the political moment that we're in, I think that's our best play. Is the energy needs to come from reformist. It needs to be a Republican only, I want you to listen very carefully, Republican only first exercise. That's not what most think tanks will do. So if I said to like the think tank I work for, hey, let's do that, they're like, I don't want to do that. I'd rather get a root canal. And then the other problem is a lot of Republican think tanks are some of this is, they're kind of enjoying kind of the blowing up part. And so haven't thought through the like, okay, what do we do about this part? So we have to find a home for this that's center right. I love the Center for Global Development, not the right place. I have an affiliation with CSIS. I don't think it's the right place. We need a center right place that's like open to the idea, and it doesn't just speak to the id in the Republican Party on this. So help me I need to find, if you're a Republican Hill staffer, I want to talk to you. If your boss is interested in this within reason, I want to talk to you. And then I need to find the right home for this. One of the places I've thought about is the Sagamore Institute, which is in Indiana. Dan Coates started it. So that's one of the places I've thought about. So, and then a lot of you in the advocacy community have a lot of ties to big philanthropy. They're not sure what to do. A lot of them are funding, like filling in the gaps. There's going to need to be somebody who's big philanthropy, who doesn't usually do, downward dog yoga or, avocado toast on the weekends with Republicans, who are going to be willing to write a check to some kind of an exercise like this. So tell me who that is. I want to talk to them. Okay. So, having said all that, I wrote a book on We need to have a center-right approach to foreign, soft power. It's now kind of like in the bargain basement. I don't know if you've seen it. It's kind of like, I'm kind of almost giving that book away, but you can get it online and, et cetera. But I do think several quick things, Connor. I know I've gone on.
No.
So just a couple of things. Look, we can't fight something with nothing. China is a peer competitor. Most of our competition with China is in the global south. It's Africa, it's Latin America, it's Southeast Asia, it's Central Asia, et cetera, Pacific Islands. Okay. So the administration is spending a lot of time Pacific Islands. Like, I'm all for like troop disbursement and like EMP, whatever. And are the Australians spending enough on subs? And are they doing their 5%? Like, I'm all for that. But let me suggest the following. I'm going to list some things: Belt and Road, undersea cables, minerals, whose vaccine you use, who do you vote for in UN elections, who do you borrow money from, who runs your power system, who runs your airport, what values you subscribe to, what media you consume. Those are all things that are foreign assistance or foreign assistance adjacent. That's not about night vision goggles or 5% of your spend on submarines. And I'm all for F-35s, and I love the B-2. I think it's great, okay? But it's not, we can't compete with China just on military alone. So if you think about subsea cables, right? So we're gonna, like, minerals, okay. So I know enough about this to be dangerous. Most countries have classified their survey results of their minerals. It's a state secret. First, you got to unclassify it. Then guess what? It's all in super old paper. So you got to go spend like a couple $1,000,000 hiring one of the fine firms in the Washington area to go put people with scanners. It's, for literally like a year. And if it's in Russian, like in Ukraine, well, you can't just put it through the AI meat grinder, right, to say dig over here or dig over there. You got to put it into English, right? So then you got to put people and type that. Oh, that means, do you see what I'm saying? So like, that's going to be a form of foreign aid. Subsea cables. Some of these things are in like Pacific Islands, right? So there's a whole bunch of obscure stuff you're going to need foreign aid for. So we can say like, oh, we're going to blow it up. I don't believe that. We're going to have some other funny name pandemic. God, I don't want it. I don't want to spend another year in my basement, but it's going to happen. So do we just say, don't take the Chi-Com vaccine? Don't take the Chi-Com ventilator? That ain't a thing. My message is we can't fight something with nothing. What's our something? So again, my theory of change is, like, I'm all for getting to a consensus. I actually think we have to get a consensus in the Republicans in Congress first. We then have to bring the Trump administration along second. And then we should bring saying, we're going to move the Overton window with the Democrats. Because, like, again, this was a center-left with a touch of anti-communism project in 1961. This might be a center-right project with a touch of humanitarianism in 2026. So we have to be prepared. And I would challenge the advocacy community to be prepared for that. That your priors may have to be kind of rethought. It's going to be uncomfortable. But I think that's where we're going to have to go. So look, we're going to need all this stuff. Maybe my book will come back into vogue in like 4 or 5 years. So please don't, hold on to it. It might be valuable down the road and you can sell it on the secondary market. But look, I think we're going to, ultimately, we can't fight something with nothing. So tell me what our something is. We can't just wag our finger and say, don't take the debt, don't take the subsea cable, don't take the Huawei, don't vote for their candidate, don't have them run your power system, don't have them run their port. We can beat them up a couple times and say, you better do it or we're going to like beat you up. But that only goes, that works to a point, but it's not enough. Thanks.
Thanks, Dan. You're always colorful, but I appreciate it because I think you make very strong points about.
I was hoping you were going to say
actually. Dan, no, you made some very strong points about the idea that we can't fight something with nothing, and that is ultimately, as others have said, events will dictate that we need something here to respond. Yeah. And so I think it's very strong. Ritu, so I want to go to you now. You've been a longtime advocate for assistance. You're at CARE now, which I always enjoy because it's where the care package came from, which I love that. It's one of my favorite pieces.
Your mom
of
did not invent that.
Yeah, exactly. Which it's amazing because she invented a lot of other things. But one thing that's come up often, and Michelle actually alluded to it earlier, is that the administration has this desire to shift to outcomes as opposed to just outputs when we measure the impact of what our assistance dollars are achieving. When you hear this, what are the types of resources? What are the functions? What's the framework that we need to be thinking about, either at the State Department or elsewhere, of how we actually get success under this kind of shift?
Yeah. Thanks so much, Connor, and to the group for putting together a really well done, really fast paper too, like an MFAN time. This was like super sonic. So thanks very much for that, and very timely. I think, sort of trying to represent the implementer INGO perspective, I think we have all been part of MFAN for so many years because we absolutely felt that the system needed major, major reforms. And we are really pleased with this hyper focus on outcomes. I think anyone who has ever read a request for a proposal or agreement from USAID would realize those things should have been one page. It should have said, we want you to deliver X, Y, Z in this time period. Tell us how you're going to do it. But that is not how the system worked. The system worked by giving us 87 pages of exactly how we should go about delivering that. Oh, and by the way, that doesn't even reflect the best practices and what we know from our own organization's experience around the world. And when our Republican friends say there's waste, fraud, and abuse, I have to say, when a U.S. program is overseas and it's not a crazy, show, but it's just not delivering for the people of that country, that is waste. That is waste. And the reason that waste happened is because USAID constructed a system where you could not bring the best thinking. You could not bring entrepreneurship. You could not bring agile. You could not bring pivot, learn, and deliver. So this focus on outcomes, I think we should absolutely be celebrating. But then the next question is, okay, what outcomes, right? And we don't have any of that from the administration or from the Congress. I think we keep hearing stronger, safer, more prosperous. That's super, that's really lovely. That's what we want for everybody. You measure that in decades. You measure that in tectonic shifts of geopolitics. That is not something, and for anyone who went to the State Department's numerous consultation sessions in which we were asked to provide metrics for safer, stronger, and more prosperous, those are not outcomes, right? So then what's in between? And I would really say to you that we can center something that this administration and the Republicans all like, and that all of us in the implementing community love even more, is that self-reliance is the outcome. That is the outcome. Independence from aid, self-reliance. Countries absolutely have to work themselves off of aid. I do think it is criminal that we never said that to countries. And we supported and facilitated a lot of really bad governance because we did not push countries to take responsibility, to care for their own people, and to address the basic needs of their own populations. That is also a good shift. So then if self-reliance is the outcome, what are the intermediary goals? I would dig around what creates a multiplier effect for economic and job growth. The biggest challenge most of our partner countries have is a giant youth population that are relatively well educated compared to previous generations, but that have no jobs and have no economic opportunity. That's going to fuel mass migration from Africa. Do you think migration from Central America is bad? Wait till you see it. what comes from the youth populations in Africa who have no opportunities. The countries are desperate, and that leads to instability and conflict and the growth of terrorist non-state organizations. So you can draw straight lines from these demographics to those things. If we don't address that, we will be much less safe. We will be much less prosperous. We will be much less strong. So I personally feel that's where we all need to be digging. How do we spur economic growth that is equitable, that is not just opening up minerals for corrupt government officials to benefit from, and while the population surrounding those minerals continue to just live in squalor? So we have to have some equitable, I've said the word, it's okay, the ceiling is still there. We have to have that kind of equal development. So the kinds of outcomes I would personally focus on is foreign direct investment coming in, or is it going out? Are you seeing a trend of more and more foreign direct investment coming in? Because if you are, it probably means your rule of law is getting better, and your contract law is getting better, and your business environment is getting better. Second, time to start a new business. This has been one that MCC has focused on. It was in the Journey to Self-Reliance metrics. Another really good outcome to focus on, and you can direct resources on that and make a difference. What is happening with what we call domestic resource mobilization? Is the country taxing its own rich people? Or is it only doing taxes on sugar, tea, and coffee, which is disproportionately affecting the poor, and by the way, mostly poor women? So what is happening with that? And then what is the rate of job growth, both in the formal sector and the informal sector, right? Those are the outcomes. And if you drive those outcomes, we will ultimately drive self-reliance for countries. So I'll stop there. We can talk a lot about outcomes, but I am, despite the destruction of everything and everyone, delighted that we have reached a point of agreement on outcomes.
Thank you, Ritu. That's great, and agree with a lot of your points. And I think you're absolutely right about this frame of, the economic growth, job growth, and how are we actually spurring that, and how are we making it equal, and more importantly, is it sustainable in the long run as well? So, look, I could ask questions of this panel all day, but I know we do want to get the audience engaged, and so we do want to open it up to you all. We have folks with the mics. I would ask that you identify yourself, affiliation, who you are and affiliation, and let's try to keep this to questions and not comments that are disguised as questions, because I really would like to give, I know it's Washington and we all have that urge. So I see a gentleman here. Let's group these. So I see a gentleman here, and there's a woman right here as well.
Name is Wes Rist. I'm an international human rights lawyer, former State Department from one of those bureaus that doesn't exist anymore. So the outcomes emphasis is really important because I've been on the ground working with local implementers. I've done grant implementation from here, and I've done that at the State Department. And I wanted to pick up on one of the things you just mentioned about rule of law. So measuring FDI, great. It tells you rule of law is getting better, but rule of law takes 20 plus years to develop. I turned down grants because the US government said, well, you have to give us an outcome in 3 years on how you've improved rule of law. So in these consensus principles, where's the idea of long-term commitment? Because running the 3 to 5 year model again and again and again, which we've now done for over 20 years, isn't going to work.
Thanks, Wes. That's a good question. And the woman that was right up here.
Hi, thank you. Rachel Oswald, reporter, CQ Roll Call. Could the panel talk to the Trump administration's desire to have more of a quid pro quo approach to foreign aid, specifically with votes to the United Nations and otherwise, particularly when we get to things like humanitarian assistance and really core development needs, public health? Is quid pro quo ever not a good idea?
Thanks so much. Really just getting to the heart of the matter there. So why don't, we've got two good questions. One really about this long-term focus and how do we move beyond just the sort of 3 or 5 year cycles. And then this question on quid pro quo. Yeah, Michelle, you want to jump in and then we'll go around?
Yeah, so I think I would refer to the consensus document. I think there is a very important idea in the paper which talks about country compacts. I think what the consensus principle tries to say is that we will always have to look at U.S. interests. There's no question with that. But we should also be looking at how do we help a country towards self-reliance. And I earlier referenced the country roadmaps that were started during Trump 1. They give you a roadmap and an idea of where a country is and where the limits are and where the gaps are. And I think we are proposing here, and I think it's a continuation of a lot of work, but a very with a much sharper focus on that longer term outcome. I think we do need to be a little bit patient on reaching those goals, and I think that that's where that comes in. I'm not going to answer the quid pro quo question. I leave that to others.
Jim, maybe go to you, then Rachel and
I
Dan.
love to jump into quid pro quo. Ultimately, foreign assistance is a tool to drive to national security outcomes, right? So we do have to link our assistance to what we're trying to accomplish from a national security perspective, and that we just have to be honest about it. It's not a charity. There are lots of wonderful charities out there that do wonderful work, but we are now, foreign assistance is a national security tool. All of our work, and I goes back to this compact idea. I do think we need to have true conversations with our partner countries to say, here's what we are prepared to do. What are you prepared to do? Both for your own people, taking accountability, doing land reform, making sure you have the ability to sue people, right? Those types of things. In addition to, hey, give us preferential treatment around whatever. Well, that's okay. I mean, there's nothing inherently wrong with us advocating on behalf of the American people in exchange for resources. It's going to be a net benefit to that country that we're working in, and the American people as well. We've always done those types of things. We just haven't been very honest about it and very clear about it. Most other countries that engage in foreign assistance are much more clear about this. Try to do foreign assistance work with France and see how far you get without a clear quid pro quo. We are also looking for the journey to self-reliance. We're looking for strong civil societies, outcomes that benefit the host country. But I do think that there should be a benefit to the American people, both economic, security, health.
Thanks, Jim. Ritu and then Dan, do you want to add anything or?
Not touching quid pro quo.
All right. Dan, do you want to say?
Yeah, let me take on both. So I agree about this long-term focus. I do think one of the things we need to think about is I think that was one of the reasons for the NED and for sort of taking a long-term approach. I also think, I remember Andrew Natsios did a study, like a 20-year longitudinal study that's okay, if you spent money on democracy and governance, there was an actual impact, but like you said, it took 20 years. So it's really hard to sell that. It's going to be harder at the State Department, which is on like a much shorter timeline. I think it's going to be a hard sell. I also think this is a role for philanthropy. A lot of philanthropy doesn't like touching this stuff for a bunch of reasons. Some of the human rights stuff, yes. Some of the democracy stuff, no. So I think we're just going to have to continue to try and educate, but it's a very hard sell. So I hear you. I agree with you. Look, if I was at a think tank, I'd be like, oh, give me some money and I'll do a study for you, like for like a self-employment. But like all the studies have been done that prove all that, right? So like, I think it's just you have to educate people. Okay, so on the quid pro quo, look, I remember during the Iraq War, I think the French went around to African nations and said, I'm going to cut off your foreign aid if you vote to support the US in the Iraq War. So like, I do think we give ourselves too much credit though. Like if you look at like most countries, let's say there's 100 countries that got foreign aid or 120, how many of them, is it more than like 1% of their GNP? Like I went and looked at this in Central America maybe 10 years ago. Like if you looked at Honduras, even Honduras, and you said, okay, throw in the Inter-American Development Bank and the World Bank and AID and the Spanish Aid Agency, I think it was like less than 1%. So like, are we really gonna like swing? I think we're giving ourselves too much credit if we think like, oh, I'm gonna withhold this aid. and you're gonna like change your vote. Like, and then the other thing I would say is, okay, let me just list some countries: Jordan, Egypt, which are like big strategic allies of the United States. Like, I don't believe we're ever gonna say to them, oh, I'm upset with you because of the way you vote, and therefore I'm gonna cut off your aid. Now, there are some smaller countries where we might try and do that, like Haiti, where maybe we can get away with that. But you also kind of have to ask yourself, is that a great look for us to kind of be doing that? I think I'm not so bueno. So I would just say that I do think the other thing I would say, and this is Jim's point, like we are not a charity. We do charitable things, but we do so out of an enlightened self-interest. Enlightened self-interest. The Marshall Plan only happened after a coup in Czechoslovakia. I can't remember if it was 1947 or 1946. 48, but literally only then. And then what they did, if you go read this book by Ben Steele, Marshall Plan, Dawn of the Cold War, was two things happened. One is they tied the Marshall Plan to NATO. But the second thing is they sent 400 members of Congress on, I'm going to say it was something like, don't quote me on this, ask ChatGPT, but I think it was 100 congressional delegations to Europe. And they were all told to not bring tuxedo wear, because at the time that was like when you dressed up for dinner. They didn't want to be seen as a junket. So Richard Nixon, who was a freshman member of Congress, went to Italy, I believe, as part of this. So they went, and Harry Truman said, we need to scare hell out of the American people. That's how the Marshall Plan happened. There was a coup in Czechoslovakia. We were afraid we were going to lose Western Europe to the communists. We sent 400 members of Congress on 100 congressional delegations, including people like Richard Nixon. And then you had people who were willing to give up their political careers, like Arthur Vandenberg, who was going to run for president and challenge. He was the chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee at the time, said, I'm going to stay in the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. I'm going to give up my presidential aspirations. I'm going to do three things. I'm going to shift the Republican Party at the Mackinac Island Conference to be an internationalist party, 48. I'm going to drive this. Second, I'm going to create the United Nations. So he was sent as a delegate to the United Nations. I'm going to create NATO. And I'm going to make sure that we pass a treaty. And then I'm going to birth the Marshall Plan. So that required a lot of political will and political capital. So we've always done things out of enlightened self-interest. Sometimes the quid pro quo is a little more subtle and nuanced, but I do think, and I agree with Jim, like if you say, okay, and we have these debates in the 90s and the early 2000s about tied aid, that's a quid pro quo as well. And, that continues to be sort of a sticky thing, if I can put it that way.
Thank you, Dan. And actually, I would say you forgot the most important part of the Marshall Plan from that perspective, which is the loans we provided to European governments were then used to purchase American goods and services from American farmers, from
Yes.
American business,
It was tied.
because there was a recognition that our own economic recovery after World War II was
linked.
directly tied to the fate of Europe and others. Would love other questions if there are some. So let's do another round. I see Bill O'Keefe way in the back, and then I see another arm over there, and I'm not sure if it's a man or a woman, because you are too far from me.
Just see a hand.
I see a hand.
Sorry. Hi, it's Alyssa here
Oh.
from DevX. Thank you all for doing this event. I came in a little bit late, so apologies if you said this at the top, but I just wanted to, Dan, you talked about kind of Republican buy-in, and I just wanted to know, has this plan been presented to Republican lawmakers, especially in the foreign relations committees, the House and the Senate? And how do you see this particular plan and the approaches within feeding into the reorganization plans of the State Department, going through both the State Department itself and on the House and Congress side? Thank you.
And then I had Bill O'Keefe.
Hi, I'm Bill O'Keefe. I'm with the Catholic Relief Services. My question is, our congressional appropriations process organizes our funding by disease, by account, and yet the direction you're talking about seems more organized by country and compact. And how do you think we can square that circle so that the funding is more aligned with the strategy?
Thanks so much, Bill. So let me just very quickly answer Alyssa just on this question of, has this been presented? We have not presented it yet, but we are planning to engage in the coming weeks with both staff and members in both the House and the Senate. So I'd say watch that space in terms of how we plan to continue the engagement. But I do think both of these get at one of the questions I had wanted to ask which was what does Congress need to know as they're looking at this, as we're looking at this approach? Michelle, you were a longtime House staffer. Ritu, Jim, you were also in the House. So I'd love if we could just kind of get into the questions that both Bill and Alyssa was alluding to, and more broadly, what does Congress need to do? And
So I'll start, and then I know that my colleagues are going to have a lot to say. I think a couple things I would say. I want to pull from something that that Dan said, which is that the world is changed from 1961. It's also changed from when I started doing this 25 years ago. I just aged myself. That's right. And so I think it is the right time for Congress to rethink how this happens. There are certain, there are earmarks that were put into the bill, directives, not earmarks, directives around basic education and particular diseases that were put in there in the early 2000s. And I think, as you were alluding to, situation is very different. And this gives us an opportunity not to step away from those sectors and that work and that important progress that we're making, but to rethink it and to think differently about it. And I just want to kind of pick up on what you were saying in terms of foreign direct investment, job growth, all those things. As the bill is currently constructed, there's not a whole lot of room and a lot of funding for those kinds of types of activities. And we have, Dan and I have been moaning and groaning about directives and earmarks and flexibility for a long time, and I'm tired of that conversation.
Put these earmarks in 20 years ago, and they're like zombie.
Yeah, they're zombie, and they don't go away. But all that to say that I think this gives us an opportunity. We have an administration with a different vision. We have a Congress who, I think, if Dan is correct, I think if people could come together and think about what is the current state of the world, what are our direct national interests that need to be met, and how do we then think about this differently? I will say it will probably result in a whole new set of implementers and programs and projects and different organizations that'll be at the table. That, I think, is not a bad thing. It doesn't mean that all the implementers will change, but some of them will. And it will also force some of those organizations and people who've been working on foreign assistance for a long time to do things differently. It'll force us to work differently with the private sector, to understand how they can bring both resources, expertise, and jobs to a country, and they can benefit from that. And that's okay, because that's how we get to self-reliance. So all this to say is I think there is an opportunity to do this. We just have to kind of gird ourselves and look at the world as it exists right now, not as it existed before, and be willing to move forward.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. And I think if this pushes us in the direction, as you said, Bill, of a country focus, that's the right focus. I mean, this is what we were talking about in 2007, 2008, that we really need toward a country-led approach. The MCC has not had any sector earmarks, right? And I think it's because its mission is very clear. It is a country-led approach. We agree on outcomes, benchmarks, and if they don't hit those benchmarks, we adjust the compact. We don't give as much money. That is the right approach to take, but with a broader set of eligibility criteria, more flexibility in that. I think, how do we engage Congress in that? I think if we had clear, agreed outcomes, then we could pursue more of a country-led approach. But I think that's the particularly ripe place to dig.
Yeah, I would say that I totally agree. And I think the new structure, if done correctly, really could be a game changer in this way, by allowing for a true country-specific development approach, right? We tried to do this at USAID as part of the journey to self-reliance. We really wanted to link strategies to budget. I mean, the idea was, let's clearly identify what the requirements are based upon the roadmap, and then that will drive our budget formulation. Congress did not care about that. But I mean, we figured over time we would build trust in sort of the expertise and the experience. But I think this actually has a better opportunity because it could link all of the development assistance and foreign assistance programs writ large into a much larger approach. Have a single unified country-specific foreign assistance strategy that then could be appropriately resourced. you have to build trust in these types of work with Congress in particular. Over time, I think you could do there.
Thank you, Jim. Dan, do you want a final
I just want to
word?
just say I'm really being prompted by the thoughtful comments of my colleagues on this panel, and I think that I mean I'm thinking about Jim Cunder did a paper 20 years ago on like a grand bargain with the Congress. Am I correct? Maybe you have to go Google this, and you know you have to like dig deep in the German Marshall Fund paper, and then there was this attempt in 2007. There was an attempt here on the Hill. I can't remember the member of Congress who was the chair. I think of Howard Berman attempted to do this. So we have, in spite of the disruption and the I don't want to dismiss what's happened. I don't like how it was done. We may have a historic opportunity to do something if we were to, I think my theory of change is different than 8 years ago. My theory of change is different than 15 years ago. And I think it has to be, as I've described. Let me just say something else, though, that I think that members of Congress and the foreign policy and national security establishment need to continue to remember that this stuff matters, and that I have to keep tying it to national security and economic imperatives, because otherwise it's not taken seriously. It's not taken seriously in security think tanks. It's not taken seriously at the State Department otherwise. And so I do think we need to, make sure that whoever's got this job, I do think all the different, stuff needs to be under one person. There's something like, I don't know, 18 or 19 agencies that do this stuff. Like at one point in the mid 90s, somebody may be around who remembers this, there was some change to the rules at OMB where like before the mid 90s, you had to get a permission slip from AID to go do international stuff. And it was changed during the Clinton administration. There was some moment where this happened. So I'd like to fix that. I'd fix that. I know there are advocates, mainly in the health world, that like, I don't want to be under this undersecretary person. I want to be under some cooler undersecretary. And so they're spending a lot of time doing that. I think it's wrong. I think it's a mistake. And I think you know what I'm talking about. And so I think that's dumb. I also think, like the 1961 Foreign Assistance Act, there were 4 agencies in 1960, and John F. Kennedy said there were too many. So if there's 19, I don't know, maybe that's a problem. So if we're really serious about this, we should take on some, some, whatever you want to call it, like some taboos or whatever you want to call it. And so I think there is potentially a window. Like I said, I think if Congress, like I said, the chairman of the House Foreign Affairs Committee wants to do a State Department reauthorization. There are pieces of this in terms of foreign aid that if it was done correctly, and if the right messengers messaged it, and you had the right advocates on the Hill, and what I'm meaning by that is like Republican members of Congress who said this is the way forward, and people said, oh, I like that member. That seems like okay, I think I could get behind that. That's, I think, what we're talking about. So I think we need to be aware of that. So I do think, look, regardless of whatever world we're in, like we're gonna need this for minerals or subsea cables. I still also think things like human rights matters. If you're a conservative, you should care about Christians in the Middle East and in Africa. I care about that issue. People care about, if you're a Republican, you should care about the fate of dissidents in Cuba or the fate of dissidents in Nicaragua. And people are like, oh, okay. I saw that the Trump administration turned back on public diplomacy in Farsi after the bombing. Now, maybe that wouldn't have been the way I necessarily would have done it. But I think you saw that they're like, well, maybe we need to turn that back on. They kept the Cuba stuff on. So we're going to need public diplomacy. We're going to need some forms of democracy and governance that I think over time, there'll be a more expansive view of this because we're going to see that we need it. We're going to need a different approach on things like we could call it public diplomacy or messaging. Do we really want, the media space filled by China or Russia? I don't think it's a good idea.
So I do love a panel where as a recovering diplomatic historian and as a proud son of Massachusetts, we can talk both about the Marshall Plan and about John F. Kennedy's role in the creation of USAID. So this has been a great panel. And as I said at the beginning, I think these were 4 people who could really help us unpack the principles. I do want to just briefly thank them, and then I'm going to turn it over to Todd to close us out. We want to try to end on time so you come back to our cocktail parties, but please join me very quickly in thanking this panel. And Todd, take us home, please.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, really fascinating. Maybe I'm biased, but I thought that was a really interesting and very engaging conversation. So thank you all very much. I think the takeaway, at least that I heard, is that this is really a critical moment of opportunity. There's been a lot of upheaval. There's been a lot of implications around the world. But this is an opportunity to get things right. And I think the broad ideological consensus that you saw spoken about today in the paper really speaks to a vision forward to do this in a very effective and impactful way, focusing on outcomes and impact. So we look forward to engaging with Congress and with the administration. If you would like more information about MFAN, please reach out to me or go on our website. And again, thank you very, very much for coming. Thanks to everyone who's been joining us online. Hope you have a good rest of the day.